It started subtly, almost too quietly to notice. We had been married for years, and like any couple, we'd had our ups and downs. But this felt different. Sandy, my wife, had started growing distant in a way I couldn't quite explain. Our conversations became one-sided, and the laughter that used to fill our home slowly disappeared, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. At first, I blamed it on stress. We'd recently been through a difficult time. A fire had destroyed our old house, and moving into my grandmother's place didn't exactly feel like a fresh beginning for her. But something about her behavior told me this wasn't just about the fire. The little things began to pile up. She started coming home late, saying she had meetings that didn't seem real. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, became something she guarded closely. The screen was always turned away from me. Then there were the nights she forgot to wear her wedding ring. She said she'd been in a hurry, or that it didn't fit anymore. I tried to ignore it. I told myself all relationships go through phases, and maybe we just needed time to reconnect. But it quickly became clear that I was the only one trying. The turning point wasn't even dramatic. It was in the everyday moments. One night, I asked if she wanted to watch one of her favorite shows together, something we used to enjoy regularly. She looked at me like I had asked her to solve a math problem. "No, I'm tired," she said, barely looking up from her phone. Later that night, I saw her laughing at something on her screen, really laughing. It wasn't the kind of laugh you have at a funny meme. It was the kind that comes when someone makes you feel alive. I couldn't ignore it anymore. She was pulling away. And deep down, I knew there had to be someone else. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was overthinking it. But all the signs were right there. The coldness, the sudden change in her style, the absence of any intimacy. Everything pointed in the same direction. She wasn't just tired of being my wife. She was either already with someone else or thinking about it seriously. I knew I needed to talk to her about it. But how do you even start that conversation? "Hey, are you cheating on me?" That's not something you casually bring up over dinner. So I waited. I paid attention. I began to notice patterns, how she'd suddenly remember plans or how her tone changed when certain names came up. She wasn't just emotionally distant. She had already left in her heart. Looking back now, I think a part of me had already accepted it. She made it easier by acting like I didn't exist. Still, part of me held on to hope. I thought maybe if I gave her space, she'd come back to me. It was naive, I know, but when you've built a life with someone, you don't just give up without a fight. The hardest part wasn't the suspicion, it was the waiting. Waiting to catch her in a lie. Waiting for her to admit the truth I already knew. Waiting for her to care enough to even bother hiding it. I felt like I was living on borrowed time. Every interaction felt like a countdown to the inevitable. And deep down, I think she felt it too. The night everything fell apart seemed normal. I came home from work, just like always. The house was quiet. It was winter, and the early darkness made everything feel heavier. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. Her car wasn't in the garage, and the porch light was off. Normally, that wouldn't have bothered me, but with how things had been lately, I felt uneasy. I walked inside and called her name. No answer. At first, I thought she might have stepped out. But when I got upstairs, I saw her bedroom light was on. I climbed the stairs and saw her standing at the dresser, putting on makeup. But this wasn't a quick touch-up for errands. She wasn't wearing jeans and a sweater. She was in a black dress I had never seen before. It was short, and the neckline left little to the imagination. Next to her were a pair of high stilettos, the tallest I had ever seen her wear. I stood in the doorway, just watching. She was so focused on applying bold red lipstick that she didn't notice me at first. Then it hit me, this wasn't just a night out. She was dressing up for someone. My chest tightened, but I stayed calm. I didn't yell or demand answers. I simply asked, "Are we going somewhere?" Her hand froze mid-application. She looked at me through the mirror, and there was no guilt on her face, only annoyance. "No," she said coldly. "I'm going out. I have a date." I didn't react right away. I think she was expecting a reaction, maybe a loud argument, some begging, or even an emotional breakdown. But I just stood there, quietly staring at her. Did you hear me? She asked again, her voice sharper this time. I said I have a date. I'm going out with another man. My heart was pounding, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a dramatic scene. No, I said calmly. She turned to face me, arms crossed, clearly annoyed. No, what? You're not going on a date, I replied. At least not while we're living under the same roof. If you want to be with someone else, that's your choice, but pack your things and find another place to stay. Once you're out, I'll file the divorce papers and you can do whatever you want. She let out a short, bitter laugh. I'm not leaving, she said coldly. I like this house. And once it's mine, I'll do whatever I want with it. If you keep acting like an idiot, I'll make sure I get most of the money when we sell it. I took a deep breath, holding on to the last bit of patience I had left. Do us both a favor, I said. Go stay with your parents until this is over. You're the one who wants out, not me. She smirked. Oh, I'll be back in 30 minutes, she said. You better not be here when I get back. If you are, I'll call the police. I'll tell them you threatened me. Maybe even hit me. You know how it works. They'll hold you for 48 hours, and by then, I'll have changed the locks. A cold anger settled inside me. She really thought she could manipulate me that easily. You're making a mistake, I said, my voice low and steady. You think you can scare me, but I'm not going anywhere. She rolled her eyes and turned back to the mirror, mumbling something about fixing her lipstick. I walked out of the room, my mind racing. She thought she had all the power, all the control, but she had underestimated me. If she wanted to play dirty, I could adjust. In the garage, my eyes landed on an aluminum baseball bat leaning against the wall, the same one I used during summer games with friends. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand. Her car was parked outside. I could almost picture her smug expression, imagining herself driving off to meet her lover while I stayed behind, stewing in silence. Not tonight. I took the bat back into the garage, opened the hood of her car, and removed the battery. I set it on my workbench. Then, with one solid hit from a hammer, I smashed her phone battery into pieces. Satisfied, I placed the broken phone back into her purse, minus the battery. She wouldn't be calling anyone tonight. As I glanced into her bag, I noticed a small packet of condoms. For a moment, I thought about poking holes in them just to mess with her. But I knew that would only give her a reason to accuse me of something worse. I didn't need that kind of trouble. By the time she walked into the kitchen, she was fully dressed, black dress, high heels, and that dramatic red lipstick. She looked at me with irritation and a smug grin, like she'd already won whatever twisted game she was playing. Out, she said, pointing to the door like I was some unwanted guest. I didn't move. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, taking a slow sip. Good luck with your night, I said casually. Her eyes narrowed. What did you do? She snapped. I smiled and took another sip. Why don't you go check your car? I suggested. Her heels clicked loudly on the floor as she stomped toward the front door. A moment later, I heard her screaming, angry, frustrated, furious. She came storming back into the house, her face red with rage. What the hell did you do to my car? She yelled. I shrugged, keeping my tone casual. It's parked on the street. Anything could have happened. You bastard, she hissed. I'll just call him to pick me up? Go ahead, I said, nodding toward her purse. You'll need your phone for that. She froze for a moment, then yanked the phone out of her bag. When she realized it wouldn't turn on, her anger exploded. You broke my phone. I leaned back, arms crossed. Maybe you should have kept a closer eye on it. At that point, she was shaking with rage. She kicked off her heels, slipped on sneakers, and stormed out the door, probably planning to ask a neighbor to borrow their phone. I watched through the window as she knocked on one door after another, growing more and more frustrated when no one answered. By the time she reached the end of the block, she was shouting. I leaned against the counter, sipping my coffee, waiting. I knew it was only a matter of time before she either found someone to help her or got desperate enough to call the cops. Either way, I was ready. She thought she was in control. But by the end of this night, she would realize just how wrong she was. I didn't have to wait long before things took an unexpected turn, though not the one I had imagined. As I sipped my coffee, I heard her footsteps pounding on the floor upstairs, then silence. That was my cue to see what she was doing. I glanced out the window just in time to catch her walking toward the garage. She wasn't about to give up that easily. The thing is, I knew Sandy well. She was impulsive, yes, but predictable. In her frustration, she must have figured out the car was out of commission and assumed I had already left. My Suburban, the Beast, as she used to call it, sat in the garage, ready to be her escape plan. What she didn't know was that I had already disconnected the garage door opener earlier, just in case she tried something like this. I followed quietly and peeked through the side door as she climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life with that deep, growling sound that echoed through the garage. For a moment, I thought about stopping her, but then decided to let her dig her own hole. She pressed the garage door opener. Nothing. She hit it again, harder this time. Still nothing. Frustration crossed her face, but instead of pausing to think, she did the most Sandy thing imaginable. She hit the gas. The Beast lunged forward, crashing into the garage door with a loud, metallic screech that made my skin crawl. The 454 horsepower engine was way too powerful for that old door. The sound of splintering wood and tearing metal filled the air as the Beast busted out of the garage, dragging parts of the door with it. But that wasn't even the worst part. Parked directly behind the garage, in possibly the worst spot imaginable, was a police cruiser. 2 officers had just arrived, likely in response to Sandy's earlier threats about calling the cops. The Beast slammed into the front of the cruiser with so much force it shoved the vehicle back several feet. The front of the police car crumpled like an accordion. One officer had just opened the driver's side door when it happened. The impact sent the door flying back, knocking him down hard. His partner, a redhead I vaguely remembered from high school, was already in motion. She yanked Sandy out of the SUV by her hair before she could even react. "Get on the ground," the officer shouted, her voice echoing through the neighborhood. Sandy screamed something incoherent, flailing as she was dragged to the pavement. She didn't fight, just sobbed and cursed while the officer handcuffed her. Meanwhile, I ran to help the officer who had been hit. His nose was clearly broken, blood pouring down his face, but he was conscious. "Hold still," I told him, cradling his head to keep his neck stable. "Help's on the way." The next 20 minutes were pure chaos. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A few even stepped outside to watch. Ambulances arrived, lights flashing. More police cars rolled in. I answered questions while keeping an eye on Sandy, who now sat in the back of a cruiser, handcuffed and crying like a child caught stealing. By the time everything settled, Sandy was on her way to the hospital with a bruised ego, a stiff neck from the airbag, and a growing list of charges: reckless endangerment, property damage, and assaulting an officer with a vehicle, just to name a few. As for me, I stood in the driveway watching what was left of the Beast get hauled away. I should have been furious, but honestly, I felt relieved. It wasn't about the damage to the car or the garage anymore. It was about finally having undeniable proof that Sandy was her own worst enemy. For all her threats, manipulation, and arrogance, she had finally hit a wall, both literally and figuratively. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe. Later, during a tense legal meeting, she crossed her arms and glared at me like I had betrayed her, which was ironic, given everything that had happened. "You're leaving me with nothing," she finally snapped. "That's not entirely true," my lawyer replied smoothly. "We're willing to let you keep one of the bedroom sets, for nostalgia." I could almost hear her teeth grinding. Without another word, she stormed out of the room, leaving her lawyer behind to handle the rest. In the end, she got to keep her car, a portion of the money she had already taken, and not much else. Even her lawyer realized she was in a losing position and convinced her to settle before things got worse. The judge didn't hold back either. When finalizing the divorce, he actually commended me for being proactive in protecting my assets, his professional way of saying Sandy had been outsmarted at every turn. When the gavel finally hit, I was free. She, on the other hand, was left to deal with the legal mess she created by slamming the Beast into a police cruiser. For me, It was never about revenge, it was about survival. Sandy had tried to manipulate, intimidate, and bully her way into taking everything. But she underestimated me. She thought I'd roll over and let her win. Instead, I played the long game, and when it was over, I walked away with my dignity intact. After all the dust settled, after the ink dried on the divorce papers, I finally had a quiet moment to breathe. It felt strange at first, like stepping into someone else's life. For years, my routine, my thoughts, even my happiness had revolved around Sandy and our marriage. Now she was gone. The house was quiet, but not in a lonely way. It felt peaceful. I could finally focus on myself, on what I wanted, instead of constantly walking on eggshells around her. The first few months were about getting my life back on track. I fixed up the house, reconnected with old friends, and picked up hobbies I neglected for years. It wasn't about distraction, it was about rediscovering who I was before everything fell apart. One of the first things I did was return to the shooting range. It had always been something I enjoyed, but I hadn't made time for it in the last years of my marriage. On one of those visits, I ran into Sergeant Sweetie, the same officer who had arrested Sandy during the garage incident. She was dressed in jeans and a casual top, completely different from the no-nonsense uniform version I remembered. We talked for a while and, to my surprise, found out she was single too. Her divorce had been messy, not as chaotic as mine, but still rough. One thing led to another, and I asked her out. To my surprise, she said yes. That first date was something special. I showed up in my best suit, probably a bit too formal, but she smiled and said she appreciated the effort. She was upfront from the start. No games, no drama. And honestly, I was done with both. 9 months later, we got married. I can say, without hesitation, it's been the happiest chapter of my life. She's not just my wife, she's my partner in every sense. We've built a life based on mutual respect and trust, two things sorely missing in my previous marriage. As for Sandy, I've heard bits and pieces about her over the years through mutual acquaintances. She remarried twice. From what I've gathered, her second husband keeps her in check. Good for him, I guess. I don't carry any anger toward her anymore. It took time to get to that place, but I realized holding on to resentment would only keep me trapped in the past. These days, life is simple, peaceful, fulfilling. My wife and I just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary with a river cruise through Europe, a trip she'd always dreamed of. Our kids are grown and thriving, and I couldn't be prouder of the people they've become. Just last week, we handed over my grandmother's old house to our daughter as a wedding gift. It felt like a full-circle moment. That house had seen so much pain and change, but now, it's the start of a new chapter for her. Every now and then, I think back to those chaotic days with Sandy. Not with regret, but with gratitude. They taught me who I am and what I'm capable of enduring. Life doesn't always follow the script, but sometimes it's the unexpected detours that lead you exactly where you're meant to be. And standing here today, I wouldn't change a thing.